So, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of You, Me, and ICED. I'm Dedra Stevenson. I'm the hostess, and I've got some amazing co-hosts. Rodney is back again with us, which we're so happy about. Rodney is a video game producer, and he's worked on some pretty major titles. And he's been so busy lately getting something out into production. I don't know if he's allowed to say anything, but if he is, I'll let him say so now. What do you think? No, no,
I'm
not
not
allowed.
allowed.
Okay. Well, we can't prize it out of him, folks. But Richard Dee is always happy to talk about his books. He's got 16 titles out into the world, and he's got short stories, and he's always working on something new. What are you working on right now, Richard?
At the moment, I'm working on the fifth and/or a Pet mystery, which is a crime mystery series set in space, and it features it features a reluctant amateur detective. It's a lady who had a shock in her life. She had to run away. She ended up orbiting Saturn on a space station, and then the bodies started turning up, and she had to turn detective. And since then, she's now solving crime all across the solar system. And as I said, I'm writing her fifth adventure at the moment, which is set on the moon.
Cool.
And involves a conspiracy that nobody else has noticed yet, but she spotted it, and now she thinks she has to do something about it. So we'll see.
Rodney, I think we've got a good subject for video game production right here.
Oh, we do, and I am a fan of his series.
Well, thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, I am too. I have been a beta reader for a few of his books, and I just love it. I think you're a great imaginative person. Brings us to our topic today. Actually, it's a good way to introduce the subject. That is fantasy fiction. Now, of course, Richard's more or less into science fiction, but I mean, it all sort of falls. I think science fiction is a very close cousin to fantasy fiction. Am I right? I mean, they're very extremely related, and they're both genres require a great deal of imagination to make them work out, to come up with not just stories, not just this happened once upon a time, this happened, and then this problem happened, and then this is how it magically turned out okay, and they live happily ever after. No, it's not just that. It's world. It's a whole universe, that an author puts together to put something like that out into the universe. It's not just Andorra Pet, it's everybody around Andorra Pet. For me, it's Phoenix Casam, in the Hakima's Tale. And, she's got the Jinn generals, that are, looking to obliterate her at any time. And then she's got her Uncle Hisham, who's her mentor slash father figure. And, she's got a number of her parents, and also the three, friendly Jinn that follow her around and basically keep her safe from being killed, by the opposing side that wish to take over the world and wipe out all humanity. I mean, isn't fantasy fun? Our minds can just go someplace else. We can kind of check out of reality for a time. And some would say that's incredibly healthy for people to do. What do you think, Rod?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, fantasy is really just the genre of fantasy is just the evolution of storytelling. There wasn't any such thing as science fiction back in the, you know, 1000 year 1100, 10th and 11th centuries. But, as science started to become part of daily life, of course, people started adding that to their stories they tell.
Right.
And the main thing with fantasy is it's usually an escape to a made up place. Um,
Yes.
in video games especially, um, I would say the majority of video games take place in a fantasy setting. Uh, Totally made up universes, totally made up realities, systems. Um, if you look at um, take a game, for instance, like World of Warcraft or EverQuest. These are role-playing games, but they take place on a multiplayer scale. So you have thousands of people experiencing the story at the same time. And
That's really fun. I mean, all this worldwide playing, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and when storytelling isn't enough, people will spawn out other activities based on fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons, which was a tabletop
Good
game that
example.
started in the 70s, and it's really a premise or a starting place for a lot of video games now.
Right, right. And a lot of people now, the critics of video games often say, the kids are they become violent, they become hyperactive,
Mhm.
they don't pay attention to their schoolwork and that sort of thing. Now, I know you talked about this before on the show, and you did say that, of course, too much of a good thing is always bad, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think in general, if it's something that people use in a modest sort of way, I mean, in moderation, do you think it could be actually helpful? Like,
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
how so?
I think anything done in moderation is helpful. Otherwise, it becomes an addiction. That's all you want to do over some time. You're looking for
Right.
self-gratification, and you're getting it, either through video games or even surfing Facebook. I mean, I know people that are
Right.
addicted to Facebook because they want to know what their friends are up to.
I
Um,
know. That's
so,
wild.
but if you moderate that, it's still giving you a outlet uh, and relaxation, at least for a brief amount of time. Then you can go back to, boring reality.
Well, some people might actually agree with you there. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I go along with everything that's been said. Yes, I write mainly science fiction, but I have actually written a fantasy novel, which came out last year, and I based it on a folktale. But I just
There you
expanded
go.
it and tried to see where it would go. But I think fantasy and science fiction are so interlinked that
Yes,
they are part of the same thing.
they
There's
are
no
part
getting
of the
away from
same family.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. So when you were little, did somebody read stories to you when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, of
Did,
course.
did,
Yeah.
what about you, Rod? Did you get stories read to you, or did you just sort of branch out on your own and find these great stories to engage with?
I remember my great grandmother telling me stories, but
Oh,
most, as soon as I was old enough to pick up a book, I would just escape off to my bedroom and just read it. I mean, the very first book I read, I remember it to this day, was Salem's Lot by Stephen King, and I
wow.
was,
That's quite a first book, Rodney.
it was. And I was very young. I can't say exactly how old I
Goodness.
was, but I don't think I was 10 yet.
Did
Uh,
you sleep that night when you finished it?
I did. It
You managed to sleep? Oh no. I think I read Amityville Horror when I was 12, and I don't think I slept very well for days after that. No.
Yeah, well, you got to remember,
Couldn't stop thinking about it.
well, you got to remember, I grew up in a haunted house, so it really,
Oh yeah, that's true. You did. You did. God, the haunted maids in your house and everything. Oh, dear heaven. Yeah. You were more used to it than I was. But Richard, you say you have somebody that read to you, huh, when you were little? Did
Yeah,
you
I
do
can
you,
remember
you credit that person to your interest in fantasy, science fiction and fantasy fiction?
I think so. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a native of Devon in England, and she grew up on a farm out on Dartmoor, and she had
Oh,
a wealth of folk stories and tales from that she remembered. And
that
I
is so
wish,
beautiful.
yeah, I wish I could remember more of them now, though, because I
yeah.
think at the time you don't pay as much attention to these things because they seem sort of in the past and boring and whatever. But it's only now
Oh.
that I wish I listened more to what she said and I could remember more of them. But I could remember she used to do the voices and she used to make them sound
Oh,
scary and all this sort of thing. And it was, yeah,
adorable.
it was wonderful. And really, I couldn't wait in a way, though I loved her doing it, I couldn't wait in a way for when I could read myself, you know. And as soon as I could start to read something, then I was off down the library and I was getting books and I was bringing books home and people were giving me books and I just started reading. And I think, you know,
Oh,
that's probably where it's all come from, that, you know, you read and you absorb it and then you start to think of your own versions or your own ways that the stories you've just read could have developed if they'd had sequels or whatever. And then you just go on from that. But the vast majority of every story, when you look at it, comes from a folk tale or a myth or a legend or something that has a grain of
true.
truth in it that's just been expanded.
True, very true. I think a lot of what we are using as source material probably started out as a folk tale. I know the Hakima's tale did. I mean, you know, I guess as soon as I got hold of my first copy of the 1001 Tale Arabian Nights, I couldn't put that down. I couldn't stop reading that. So I wanted to create something that American kids would be able to connect with, you know, in terms of Middle Eastern folklore,
Yeah.
you know, something that would bridge the culture. And I think it does that very well, just as somebody like me, you know, bridges the cultures. So it really is representing who wrote it, I think. Yeah, you're right. Folklore is a great source of material. But you know what I'm wondering is now, I mean, I've been doing some reading coming up to, you know, this episode, and you know, I think that we do have a lot to thank these grandmothers for, actually, because it's supposedly now been tried and tested that children who grow up with someone reading to them actually turn out with better vocabulary, higher grades in school, and a more imaginative way outlook. So in other words, they're the type of people that can think outside of the box more than others. So the grandmothers all need to be, you know, thanked properly today. Those who read to them. In my case, there wasn't anybody reading those stories, but I did develop a natural curiosity because, you know, it was just something, you know, that I found as a great comfort, you know, to combat that loneliness, you know, as a little kid. You know, I went to the library and, you know, all those books were there, and suddenly there were worlds available to me, you know. So it was a great way to escape into the world, another world, you
Yeah.
know, in that way. And one could also argue that, you know, we're in such stressful times now. I mean, we might even be able to, you know, taking a step back sometimes and enjoying a nice fantasy based story, you know, might just take you back to the feeling of childhood just for a little while and let you take a break, you know, from the heart, you know, the world, you know, that you know, we're all caving into sometimes. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I agree. And you know, my dad was a very avid reader. He loved westerns.
Oh, he
Uh,
still
s-
is, right?
oh, he still is,
Yeah.
yeah. And you know, we bought him a Kindle for Christmas one year,
Oh,
and
so cute.
he's been a steady reader since. But yeah,
Oh,
you
I
know,
love Uncle Walt.
like I said though, you know, grabbing, you know, one of his books after he's finished reading it, I would slip off and to my room and read it, and I probably did not understand half the words in it, but you know, I would actually just go look them up in a dictionary, just so I knew what the word meant.
Oh,
Uh,
me too. I would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I really exposed myself to a lot of different genre
Mhm.
at an early age, and you know, I came out of that with a stronger respect for storytelling. Louis L'Amour and his westerns was a strong influence on a lot of my writing,
Mhm.
because I do like to. You know, the narrative style I use is more down to earth as people actually speak. Um, and you know I kind of got those inputs from him,
Mhm.
but yeah, you know, folklore, mythology, all of that eventually evolved into, the written fantasy genres that we have now. And even fantasy is subdivided into so many different genre now that
True.
as it continues to evolve, it's just going to get more granular into, specific focus areas.
Right. There's even fantasy science fiction now. In
Hmm.
fact, there's a genre that's specifically just very narrowed down to fantasy science fiction. That's terrific. Well, it's very interesting, that these God, what am I trying to say here? And feel free to jump in, you guys. But yeah, no, it's healthy. I think it's incredibly healthy, and it might be a little bit of a shame that so many people, they stay all the time on Facebook and their phones and everything, and they're not really understanding. I mean, that these things are actually healthy diversions sometimes, and not only do they teach you things, they give you a little break from things that might be stressing you out. Now, I think a lot of people do that through television these days more than reading books. Maybe fantasy television series like Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
Recently, we have House of the Dragon, which I think is probably doing much better than Game of Thrones. So far. What do you think? Have you guys
Yeah.
seen it yet?
I've seen, yeah, I've seen the first 3 episodes of House of the Dragon, and I think it's better. It's certainly better than the last series of Game of Thrones. It's a lot more realistic. It's a lot. There's a lot more going on,
Ah,
and I think they've learned the lesson maybe from where they went at the Game of Thrones, and they're making a better program.
I
Is my
completely agree with you there.
opinion. Yeah,
Yeah, I think George R. R. Martin is personally involved. That's
I think
probably got
that's
something to do
probably
with
got a
it.
lot to do with it. Yeah. And I wonder now if he's if because of the backlash to the end of Game of Thrones has sort of put him off completing the books
Yeah, a
in a
lot of
way.
people
You think, well,
speak
what's the
about
point of me writing the
that.
books now? Because whatever I write, it's going to be compared, or this should have been better, or that this wasn't done. And I think in a way he's sort of thought, well, I can't be bothered now. We'll
Oh
just carry on and do
no.
something else.
He's demotivated
Yeah.
now. Do you
Sure.
think?
I think
Gosh.
so because of the reaction to. I know he wasn't involved in the later stages of Game of Thrones, and I know that they weren't based on his source material. But the perception is Game of Thrones is George R. R. Martin. That's the way people look at it, and they look at
They
it and think, well, the
do.
end of that wasn't much good, so I can't really be bothered with the books. I think maybe that comes back to
Yeah.
him, and he thinks, well, I can't be bothered to write them now because it's not the story I wanted to write, but people have got it fixed in their heads already. That's how it's going
That
to
that's
end.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think he should seize the opportunity to go ahead and finish those books
I would
and
love to see
Mhm.
them. Certainly,
show
yeah,
those
I'd like to read
amateurs
them.
how it's really done.
Mm.
Yes, I
Yeah,
really do
I
too.
agree. Yeah, I'd love to
I
read the
hope he
last 2.
watches
Yeah.
this so that he can know how we feel. And do you think there's any shot he'll watch it? I'll
Mm.
tag him in the next video and see what happens.
There's a plan.
You never know,
Yeah,
right?
never know who's watching.
Exactly. Well, going back to fairy tales though, and all children when they watch fairy tales like Disney, do you think that they learn some life lessons from watching Disney cartoons?
I think probably nowadays they do because I think that's part of the formula for most kids stories, especially animated features like even Toy Story, Kung Fu
Mhm.
Panda. They all had little life lessons, as part of
Right.
the storyline. However, when I think back to like the original Cinderella and things like that, I think there's an argument there that yeah, it
Hmm.
kind of was a reflection on life, and whereas the audience primarily probably wasn't kids,
Mm-mm.
because it's more like a young adult to adult type uh, series, even back in whenever it came out originally. But I
Yes.
do think that if you pay enough attention to it, I think there is probably a life lesson. Because most writers, a plot line is essentially based on some sort of life story, either a personal story or something that's somewhat familiar because you're discussing a journey.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. And
Yeah,
of course, the fable is a well-known form of storytelling that gets a message across.
good
Um,
example.
and you can expand one of those into a story and use the whole thing as the basis for imparting some sort of message, can't you? And if it's just the message that the hero gets at the end, well, it's the same thing, isn't it?
yep.
Right. True, true.
Yeah.
And some and also your science fiction, actually imparts good messages sometimes. I mean, Saul is a very hopeful message. I mean, I started off the
That's
first
right.
chapter of that book feeling very sad and
Mm.
feeling a little hard, like it was hard to push on because the poor guy was made a paraplegic, and I mean, if for some people, I think I might be a little sensitive to that because it's just, everybody's got their fears, and that might be one that's you're a little bit sensitive to, the idea that you can't really move or do things for yourself
Yeah.
anymore, you know, but, as you read on, you discover that it's actually a book about hope. It's hope and
I think
it's
it is.
something,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
it's a
It's a book
hopeful
about second
story.
chances. That's how I look at it. Really, it's yes, the first couple of chapters are a bit grim, but it certainly translates into a story of second chances and the price that you may be asked to pay for a second chance. But the ultimate thing is it may well be worth it.
Right. Now, there's all kinds of literature out there, to have us measure our stories against certain standards, like a hero or a character in a book or a movie or a television show is only really interesting, depending on what they have to get done. They have to have a mission, a task of some kind, something that has to be completed, whether it be a personal journey or something something more urgent, and they have a deadline. That task has to have a deadline, and there has to be a lot of obstacles in their way, to get this task completed. Do you think that basically all stories are kind of following that? I mean, they say that that's how to create tension, with your characters, right? So, I mean, otherwise, if we don't create that tension, readers or viewers, won't be very engrossed in the story. Do you think
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Yeah, I think just the building tension and the written word is what keeps someone interested in
mhm,
continuing to read. They want to know what happens next.
right,
In video games, we don't use tension in the same way, but we give the player a goal from you're advancing your
good
character or
point.
avatar uh, to get to the end of the story.
Yes,
So I mean, there are different ways to keep someone interested in whatever they're reading or watching or playing, but I think it's slightly different whether it's written or through electronic media.
Yeah.
right, right.
You,
But then,
you,
I
you,
think a video game actually could be, from what I've seen of them, they're tension like all the time. I mean, because there's so many obstacles in your way to complete this level or get to that
Right.
goal or that, because
But
somebody could
the
be there with a machine gun around the corner to kill
yeah,
you, or
but
throw
the
some kind of weird weapon at you.
yeah, but the tension though is not in the narrative form, it's an experience. I mean,
Yes,
you are actually
yes,
experiencing it in gameplay, whereas when you're writing it and then reading it, it's a little more of a challenge to establish tension. So that's why you have to weave it into plot lines and subplots, and you know, um, make sure you're doing some character building before you get there, so that people can
yeah.
either get an attachment or a dislike to the character, so that whatever you're doing next it keeps them entertained and keeps their attention.
yeah,
It's good you
yeah,
mentioned the villain, it's that is part of the way we create tension, right? Is to make people really, really despise the villain. I mean, that's important. I mean, in Outlander. Those Outlander, which are a series of books as well as a wonderful award-winning television show that I just love. There's the Captain Jack Randall, element. I mean, are you a fan of Outlander? Either one of you?
I'm
No?
not. No, I know about it, but I've not actually seen.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
absolutely
People say it's
brilliant.
great.
Yeah, I've read the first book and I've seen like the first season of the show. That's about it
Yeah.
though.
Oh, the hatefulness of his character. Oh my God, and there's another, well, now there's a world that's been created using historical drama. That would probably be a little bit more historical drama, right? But would you say there are any elements of fantasy there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, just the whole premise of going through a portal and going back in time. That's fantasy right there.
Exactly. That's what I think
Yeah.
too. That it's sort of, there's a lot of genres that sort of go hand in hand, with fantasy,
Yeah.
and that's one thing that makes it magical. I mean, there, no matter what we do, I think there's that part of us that wants to go back, to our bedroom when the grandmother is sitting there reading those wonderful stories and taking us into tales of folklore and the beautiful green of Devonshire and places like that, which I have actually visited, where he's talking about, and it's just the most breathtakingly beautiful place. It really is. It's no wonder that fairy tales have been launched there. It looks like
it's a
fairy
magical
tale.
place, very much.
It's magical. It really
Yeah.
is very inspiring.
I'd never started writing until I moved back to Devon. So
really,
so
you were
there's
inspired by being
something to
there.
do with living down here started me writing.
True that. Well, I mean, Rod lives in North Carolina. I mean, now England is one thing, but North Carolina is certainly a beautiful spot as well. I got to give it up for North Carolina. I mean, if you really want to experience your 4 complete seasons, I think you can do so there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the beautiful changing of the leaves and everything. I mean, do you find that environment very inspiring?
Yeah. Yeah.
Your
And,
work?
we have everything, the mountains is probably the most inspiring to me, but I know people that go to the beach to get inspired to write. So we
Yeah.
have plenty of environments here, and I know we do in the state here, we do have a very strong writing guild. And pretty much most of the major towns have really strong writing groups. So this is a very writing state to live in. So
Oh, well, I wish we had more of that kind of an environment here. I'm trying very hard with the Abu Dhabi Writers Group to get something going. It's a little like pulling teeth at the moment, but I'm trying. Sometimes I have to, it's very important for me to connect with writers like you guys, in other places sometimes, so that I can feel like there's some kindred spirits out there. Kindred spirits. That reminds me of Spooks, another little series that Rod and I have gotten started, on Blue Jenny Media. The first one being called Ifrit, based on folklore, just like Richard said. I mean, this is something he and I are cooking up, to come out really soon as well. Now, I mean, we're all 3 of us, I think we can agree, we're all kind of what other kids would have described as kind of weird, quirky kids, that, that would have like had our noses in a book and had our brains, our imaginations way out into a fantasy world somewhere. Did you guys have an imaginary friend? Be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
well, mine was a ghost. I had a ghost as a
You
friend.
had a ghost. That's even better. Wow. Now that's even better. I wish I'd had a ghost. I'm kind of jealous, actually, that I never got to see a ghost when I was a kid. Yeah. You'll have to tell me more about that. Maybe we should put make that in Jimmy's story and
It's let's just say it could show up in a spooks story. So
yes, it really should. It so should. I mean, that's part of American folklore as well. I mean, especially the American South, you have ghost stories galore in the American South. We love our ghost stories.
Yeah.
Don't we, Rod?
And they're
Yeah.
not, and all ghost stories are not all horror either. Some
No.
ghost stories are, folklore or, just a buddy comedy sometimes. And I do know a couple of writers that, they write stories about where, the main character has a ghost as their, uh, you know, buddy
Yeah.
and they do quite well with those type books. So.
Totally, totally. I love that. I love that. I think it's even even a point of pride, in the South if you've got you've had a ghost inhabiting your house. It's something you can tell all your friends, when they come over for parties and you know
Yeah, and it's not just the South either. I mean, even most of the colonial, states that were
colonial
one of the 13
states.
colonies, uh,
Wow,
we have
yeah.
very
Old
old.
soldier ghosts and
Yeah, we
stuff,
have
right.
old houses. I live very close to a Revolutionary War battleground and a Civil War battleground.
There you go.
So we had wars fought here. I mean, like even Richard in England. There's been
Yeah.
tons of battles all over the English countryside.
Have you ever seen
So
a ghost, Richard?
The house that we lived in before this one had a ghost. Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
You
Okay.
could hear it going up and down the stairs, turning lights on, and yeah, it never felt malevolent. It always felt friendly and happy, and we think it was a child.
yeah.
But when we remodeled the kitchen, we found the old light switch behind the old tiling that we used to hear clicking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was an old. The house was built in 1908,
So
and
cool.
it had been remodeled a few times, I guess, before we moved in. But when we had the kitchen remodeled, the people took the old tiling off the walls, and they found an old light switch right in the place where we used to hear this switch clicking. So
That's
as far as I'm
incredible.
concerned, there was someone there, and they were friendly enough, and that was nice because it made the house feel a bit more lived in a way, you know.
And in the Middle East, we don't really say here that they're ghosts. People more or less claim that they're all jinn. Basically, they're genie,
Mhm.
because of the Islamic belief that every human being on earth is born with a genie, two genies that follow them around and record everything that they do. One of them records the bad deeds and records the good deeds. And, you know, they can also, once you die, they can also imitate you and they can appear as you and they know secret things, about you once you've passed because they literally spent every single moment with you while you were alive, you know, and those could be the whispers in your ear that you were hearing, sometimes, why don't you try this, do that, nobody will know. Right. It could have been them all along, right?
Yeah.
So, but they say that is they call it your arwah, or I think your no, there's another name, your kadim. I think kadim is your companion. Basically, it's your companion that somebody sees, and they can be either a comfort to your family or maybe sometimes a source of great distress. You know, yeah. But it's like Rod said, it doesn't always have to be a horror story. Sometimes they can be friendly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They might not mean you any harm at all, actually.
Yeah, like Casper.
Yeah, like Casper.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's not an unfriendly story.
No.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed this. It was kind of a walk down memory lane, and I think it sort of gets to the core of who we are as creative people, and I think that I hope, at least I hope that people who watch this might want to spend more time encouraging that in everyone around them. Spend more time with fantasy fiction, because it's actually really good for you. It could help you take that break, that mental break for a while and go somewhere else and actually learn how to think more creatively. not only increase your vocabulary, but think more outside the box. You'll become more of a person that can do that, if you spend more time letting your mind wander. So let's encourage people to be imaginative.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for joining me. And thanks everybody for watching You, Me, and ICED. I'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.